Shabbat Shalom. You know, it's the last month of 5783 almost. We thought we would try something a little different. Rabbi Dahlen and I both have very busy summers, wonderful, blessed summers. The challenge is we've been at different places at different times. So when I saw Rabbi Dahlen this week, I said, oh, how have you been? How was your summer? Here's our opportunity to get caught up, and we thought we would take this opportunity just to try something a little different. You're stuck listening to one of us each and every week, so now you're stuck listening to the two of us together.
Thanks, Liz.
There we go. I appreciate that. There's one. It is my honor and my pleasure this Shabbat to interview Rabbi Yoni Dahlen, the author of Our Land and the Land of Our Fathers, The Case of A.D. Gordon, available on Amazon.com.
Indeed.
And
after Shabbos.
After Shabbos. And a frequent contributor to the Christian Science Monitor and the Accidental Talmudist. Rabbi Yoni Dahlen grew up on the prairies of northern Iowa, fell in love with Jewish thought and philosophy in college on the plains of South Dakota, just like every Jew, and deepened the commitment to text, tradition, ritual, and history at Brandeis University and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, with a couple of years in Italy and Israel along the way. He's married to Meredith, and they have two children, Elior and Ezra. Rabbi Dahlen is one of the spiritual leaders of congregation Shaarey Zedek in Southfield, Michigan. My first question, Rabbi Dahlen, some of which he and I have spoken about before, some of which he hasn't heard my questions. Really, the Christian Science Monitor?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
That's a great question. First of all, thank you for bringing me in all the way from Huntington Woods, Michigan. I appreciate it. The Christian Science Monitor article was really interesting. I had never spoken with them before, but they reached out.
You're not a frequent reader
I'm
of
not
the
a frequent reader of the Christian Science Monitor, admittedly, although it is very good. It's a fascinating publication. But they reached out to talk about the future of congregational participation in a digital age. So less and less people are physically showing up to organized religion in general, not just synagogues. And they asked what the future looks like with AI, if AI is going to replace clergy, if we have to have more of a presence via social media and elsewhere. And it was a fascinating conversation that we got to have.
One of my fears in the midst of COVID is that all of us were going to have to sell our buildings, and we're just going to be given hour slots in front of green screens. So when it came to the Shaarey Zedek hour slot, we'd put the stained glass behind us, and then we'd go an hour later. So has that changed now? Has that slowed down? Has that reversed course with COVID behind us?
No. So that's the interesting thing from the conversation, is that all of these clergy have said, okay, COVID is not behind us, not over, but is now something that we know as our reality and something that we deal with. And yet all of the changes that we've made throughout COVID are here to stay. Whether it be live streaming or whether it be recording services, everything looks a little bit different in Judaism than it did with our Christian colleagues, because there's not the same sense of halakha as a barrier, technology as a barrier. So it's fascinating. I know for a fact that a lot of clergy in Metro Detroit for their high holiday sermons are addressing this very question of artificial intelligence as a replacement for clergy, or if there's a way of finding profundity and finding meaning and finding spirituality from artificial intelligence.
Is it good for the Jews? And when I say it, I'm really thinking of all of these, the entire revolution in technology as it pertains to our spiritual lives.
No. Yes, it's great to get us in the door.
That was the most Jewish answer, by the way.
Yes, no.
No, yes,
no.
Yes, no.
It's a great way to get your foot in the door. But some of the other things we're going to talk about in this period of time is there is no such thing as Judaism without being together in community. That's it. We can. I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Marcus Collins on Thursday night from the University of Michigan, who wrote this great book called For the Culture. And it's all about how to sell whatever it is, it might be our product or our congregation or whoever we are, to the marketplace. And he said the marketplace is people, right? So all of us feel things in our kishkas, right? That's how we buy things, that's how we consume things, that's how we participate in the world. I told him that the one thing that's different is Judaism, we don't start in a place of belief. We don't, even when we have a conversion candidate, we don't say, here's what I'm asking you to believe. Can you say this creed? Can you say whatever back? It says, are you willing to take on these physical obligations or spiritual obligations? Keeping Shabbat, keeping kosher, living an orthopraxic Jewish life, doing Jewish ritual. Belief is complicated and comes and goes in different ways, but to be able to experience Judaism is to be with people. You can't do it. There's no such thing as Jewish theology or Jewish thought that exists as a silo by itself.
So if community is sort of at the essence of Judaism, and we've just talked in the last moment about going from the tablets of law to the computer tablet that we hold in front of us, and I want to now take us from the computer tablet back to the tablets of law, because here we are, right, we're in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Re'eh, which speaks primarily to two major concepts within Judaism in general, Deuteronomy in particular, and that's land and law, right? Land and law and the relationship between the two. So, especially now thinking about this idea of community, and as I just mentioned a few moments ago, Rebecca and I, we have the honor of hosting our wonderful Israeli family in our home, and we were talking a little bit about the differences of Judaism in Israel versus Judaism here. Right here for Judaism, we have to specifically come to a synagogue to find community. Right? We have to come to the synagogue to find community in America, to find Jewish community. In Israel, my favorite experiences are when the cab driver or the grocery store checkout person wishes me a Shabbat Shalom. Right? Community is infused in the land of Israel. So I want to bring that now to you. Of all of us on the Bima who love Israel, Rabbi Dahlen is actually the only one who holds Israeli citizenship. So I'm wondering if you'll tell us about your personal relationship with the land of Israel, how you became an Israeli citizen, how you became a Huntington Woodsite, and how your relationship with Israel has therefore evolved over time.
So I first went to Israel way later than a lot of Jewish folks do. It wasn't until Birthright, when I was in grad school, that I went to Israel for the first time, and I fell in love like almost everyone does in Birthright for different reasons and for different things, right? The great majority of the people that I was on Birthright with had been to Israel before, and were really looking forward to the Kotel.
Right, I don't think there's a direct flight, by the way, from Iowa to Tel Aviv.
There's not, although I was at Boston, so there was. So that was much easier. But for the majority of folks, that was their place, right? To go to the Kotel in Jerusalem was a place that they felt that incredible energy. And I loved it there, and it felt beautiful and holy, but I didn't have that same reaction that they did. But when I was up on a kibbutz in the Galil as part of Birthright, and everyone else saw that as a time to party with the kibbutzniks and then sleep in the next morning, I woke up at 5 with the kibbutzniks and helped out in the fields until breakfast, and that for me was the holiest experience that I had had. Actually being mamish with my hands in the dirt, in the Galilee, watching the sunrise in the Galil.
That's just like me. I really feel closest to God when my hands are in the dirt.
Right. So for me, that was the game changer, because I talk about this a lot from the Bima, but it's really important, and we often overlook it, that the main character of Torah we often think is Moshe or Abraham or God, Hashem. But the main character of Torah is Eretz Yisrael. It is the focus of the entire Torah. It is the focus that keeps coming back, the through line through them all. In our parsha this week and in where we are in Devarim, it's Moshe saying, you're going, I'm not, but this is the promise. This is what it's all about. And the other things that come from that are the things that are way more complicated. The Beit HaMikdash, building temple, building Jewish autonomy, building human-made things is way more complicated. Building a state, a political state of Israel, as we see, is complicated. But the one thing that's not so complicated is the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, the land itself, that has meaning, that it has some kind of deep historical significance, that our shorashim, that our roots are deeply attached there. And those things are so much easier to navigate, to wake up in the Galil and look at the sun rising, rather than to try to figure out who gets to go on the Har HaBayit, who gets to be on the Temple Mount, who gets to build in certain areas, who gets to have apartments in certain places. And in fact, I think that's that part is the part that's not nearly as important as the first part.
So I'm a Yerushalmi, right? Jerusalem is the happiest place on earth for me. When you leave Jerusalem, as you've said, you leave behind a lot of the politics of nation building, whether ancient or modern. You leave behind a lot of the organizational structure of religion behind you, and you enter a different land. I want to just drill down a little bit. You felt most spiritual when your hands were in the dirt. I clearly heard that and felt uncomfortable about it. But you also said while you were with the other kibbutznikim.
Yeah.
So was it that sense of community with the kibbutzniks? Was it your hands in the earth? Or what was the relationship between the two that brought you closer to God?
I think there's a little bit of both that come with it. I think the holiness of the land and the beauty of the land is undeniable. But when you're with kibbutznikim through and through, where their passion is the idea of rebuilding the land of Israel, not in the sense of skyscrapers and economy and capitalism. Their goal is really fruit trees and the cultivation, the greening of the desert, right? That's the idea of a greater Israel to them, is not a geographical border. It's getting back in touch with our biblical selves. So that ideology, I think being around people with that ideology changed my whole idea about what it means to be in Israel, which made me fall deeply in love with Israel in a very complicated way of me trying to, I ran away in rabbinical school after my first year and said, I don't know if I can come back unless I can spend the next year and a half in Israel. And I spent the first 5 months before our program started on a kibbutz in Emek Yisrael in our partnership region. Exactly right. Got me, Roni. Good stuff. And it was exactly what I wanted. And it was, in some ways, when I was going back to Yerushalayim, which I love and love Yerushalayim, but I was also missing the Galil, and I was missing Emek Yisrael, and I was missing the ability on Shabbatot to be with people whose dream of Israel wasn't the marketplace of Israel or the kind of the statehood of Israel, but the biblical beauty and the biblical resettling of Israel in that regard.
So before I use that actually as a shift to another topic, will you just take a moment, because you have a new relationship with our partnership region in Israel, and I don't know if the congregation knows about it.
Oh, yes. So I am the honorary rabbi of the partnership region as far as the stateside stuff goes. So we bring in Israelis from our partnership region each year and show them around Metro Detroit, and we have this great, beautiful relationship with Emek Yisrael and the greater region there. If you want to know exactly where Emek Yisrael is and different cities that are part of it, you can come talk to us and we'll let you know. So we get to have this amazing opportunity for Kiruv, for strengthening our relationship with this gorgeous, important part of Israel. And different cities around the country and in the United States have different partnership regions, but ours is, I think, the best.
No question, right?
No
Ours
question.
is the best region?
Yes.
You can ask our Israeli family there.
For sure.
So let's bring it back now, because you talked about the kibbutznikim literally building the land, right? From the fruit trees to the vegetables to the spices to feeding the Jewish people, perhaps the holiest thing that we can do. We see in Deuteronomy that that's directly tied into our observance of law, right? How the land produces is directly tied into our observance of law. So I want to just ask you, while standing on one foot or sitting on one, we'll just stop there. How do you understand the nature of mitzvot? What does it mean to you to be commanded?
Yeah. So I think it's a really complicated question, and one that I struggle with in my own Jewish identity often. There's definitely been times in my Jewish life where I've subscribed to a Leibovitz idea of, you do it because you're supposed to do it. That's chiyuv. Hashem said it, do it.
Right, chiyuv, obligation.
Right, that's the obligation. But then there's also parts of me that, especially after talking with Dr. Collins on Thursday night, is what's the whole goal of peoplehood in general, or an individual self, is to find community and tribe. And I think that mitzvot is our way of subscribing to tribe. These are the things we do, and that makes us who we are. And the things that we do that might even be chok, the things that we can't really say that there's an ethical reason for it or or a clear practical reason, keeping kosher, doing these different things, they keep us different and distinct, and that's the significance of them. So doing mitzvot keeps us together. That's where I find the most meaning in my mitzvot, and sometimes I struggle with it to say, this doesn't feel significant to me, but then I will respond to myself, I'm also very Jewish, right, to argue against myself, and to say, it doesn't necessarily have to, because what it is doing more than anything else is keeping me firmly rooted in my Jewish identity. And Dr. Collins used this idea of, he's a Christian who grew up in Detroit, actually in the old Jewish neighborhoods of Northwest Detroit, and it was interesting to be able to talk about that. But he used this example of, when I'm traveling and I wear my Detroit baseball cap, it doesn't mean anything at the Wayne Airport, right? Detroit Wayne. But when you're somewhere else and you have your Tigers cap on, or you have your U of M cap on, your tribe of U of M people will follow you and say, I went to U of M, go blue, or whatever it is. And I said, you have no idea. Like when you see someone with a kippah, not just at an airport, but anywhere, and especially where there aren't a lot of Jews, it is beeline family. And the story I tell, and that's the beauty of Israel too, right? The story I often tell in Israel is, there was one Shabbat when I was working at Hanaton at the kibbutz in Emek Yezreel and going back to Jerusalem. And on the bus ride back home, which is a couple hours, after Shabbat, so it's later in the evening, there was a couple who I could see were kind of whispering, and they had a baby, and they were whispering, and then the guy says, "Slicha, excuse me, my wife and I, we have our baby who is sleeping right now. We haven't had any sleep in days. Is there any way that you can just hold our baby while we take a nap on the bus?" And that is unthinkable on a Greyhound from Detroit to New York. But in Israel, this beautiful sense of family to say, listen, cousin, brother, we're desperate for sleep. Is there any way you can help us out? And to have that trust of being like, this guy will take care of our kid. That's tribalism in the most beautiful sense of the way. There's negative aspects of tribalism, but that's tribe at its purest and at its most beautiful.
Did your arms get tired?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Right, so we talk about the classical formulation as God plus Torah equals the people Israel. Right? God plus Torah equals the people Israel. I think it's Reconstructionist Judaism sort of flipped it on its head, and that's a little bit of what I'm hearing you say, which is God plus the people Israel equals Torah. Right? That sense of law and commandedness comes from the relational aspect of things. So I just want to sort of ask you one more question on all of this as we think of law and land and the relationship between the two. How has your relationship with either or both of those concepts changed since you've become a father in these last few years?
Oh, man. So Meredith and I had lots of conversations where we really wanted children, but at the same time we also said, here's a crazy broken world. And we need to think about the ethics of actually bringing a child into such a crazy world. And especially a world where anti-Semitism is on the rise, and what does it mean to bring a Jewish child into this world? Is it a responsible thing to do? And the more we talked, the more deeply rooted our conversation became about Torah and about the foundational ideas of Torah, which is that the mitzvot we do and the tribe that we have disseminated throughout the world, our whole focus is to put a broken world back together. And it's a little bit selfish, but it also is, we thought, and we still hold true to this, an idea that comes with a little bit of ego and hubris is to say that my children, as they come into the world, are going to make this world better if we do our jobs, right? But that's our obligation too. As Jews, it's to live commandments, but it's not to do it in a vacuum. It's to understand that there's brokenness, and it's our job to help put it back together. So all of this has changed dramatically to make it not about me and us and the Jewish life we want our family to have. It's about how does the Judaism that we teach our children make the world better. And there are times when we feel like we fall short, and there are times when we feel like if they can learn just one thing and to come to shul and to see the beauty of our synagogue family and to see how people are coming together to love one another and give goodness into the world, dayenu, like that's enough in its own right. So that's complicated, but that's where we are, thinking that bringing Jewish kids into a world is good for the world.
So as we go forward in this week of Parshat Re'eh, it's, I think, an important message to really take forward, this idea that how we observe the mitzvot ben adam lamakom, our relationship with God, and mitzvot ben adam lachavero, our relationship with each other, how we literally are obligated toward one another, actually comes to benefit us and the land of Israel, and probably even more importantly, how is it that what we do, how we behave, affects not just us, but our children and our grandchildren here and in Eretz Yisrael. With that, thank you for your time this morning, Rabbi Dahlen.
Thank you. I'm going to return the favor and interview you next time.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos, everyone.